right, welcome everyone. I will call to order this meeting of the Climate Action and Resilience Committee of the Bloomington Common Council. It is Tuesday, March 29th, 2022 at 6:02 p.m. Among committee members, we have myself, Councilmember Flaherty as chair, as well as Councilmembers Piedmont Smith and Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Rallo is absent, and we are also joined by Lauren Clemens, who is the Assistant Director for Sustainability. I'll just give a brief summary and overview of the agenda and kind of our approach here. To refresh the memory of folks, Lauren and Alex, her department head, suggested last fall that this committee might want to meet on a roughly quarterly basis to check in and have the ability to go a little bit deeper on some of the tracking and reporting on initiatives related to the Sustainability Action Plan as well as the Climate Action Plan. We met briefly in December to kind of flesh out a schedule for the year and think about how to organize that work. We had a meeting scheduled for, I think, late February that we needed to postpone for some unforeseen circumstances, and here we are with our first quarterly meeting of 2022, technically still in the first quarter, so we've made it. And on the agenda, we have updates from Lauren Clemens, Assistant Director of Sustainability. She will share a number of updates on programs, including the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program, Solar and Energy Efficiency Loan Program, Compost Up, BCOS Climate Equity Town Hall that took place recently, Climate Engagement Platform, Sustainability Action Plan, and Climate Action Plan tracking and reporting to Council. And I think that conversation will also be framed, at least in part, in the context of planned reporting to the full Council in sometime in April or May. And then we also have a few items from committee members that were flagged ahead of this meeting. A few from Councilmember Piedmont Smith, including recycling requirements and waste reduction strategies. From Councilmember Flaherty, 2022 legislative priorities from the Climate Action Plan, as well as UDO updates. And then we've also got a line for if there are other councilmember issues that come up along the way that we'd like to discuss at that point. Finally, we'll discuss scheduling, and we will adjourn. So with that, I will go ahead and, recognize Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. I just wondered if there's an end time for the meeting so we can kind of apportion our time.
Sure, I'd like to hear your feedback. It was we didn't post an end time, though online it was noticed as 6 to 7 p.m. I'm not sure if that's...
We just have to pick an end time.
Yeah. I was figuring an hour to an hour and a half myself. We can try to keep it to an hour, and does anybody have strong feelings or opinions?
As long as we're done by 7:30 is fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste, we should be, thoughtful about time. So we can try to keep it to an hour. If we go a little over, it sounds like we're okay for that. Good question. And I guess just from a procedural note, I don't think in this committee setting, in a small setting, we have to be overly formal. So feel free to cut in with questions and that sort of thing. And I think Lauren plans to take questions after each program update. So with that, we can go to Lauren.
Okay. See if this is working. Just a second. Okay, as Councilmember Flaherty mentioned, I am going to go through and stop at the end of each program so we can talk about them separately and address the questions separately since they are relating to different sections of the Climate Action Plan. But the focus of today was to just provide a quarterly update, more in-depth discussion of some of the programs that are funded through Recover Forward, as well as to allow an opportunity to talk more about what's coming up next with the full council presentation.
And will these slides be made available to us?
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Thank you.
I think we can, okay. So in order, and I will be I'll start with Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program to follow the agenda, and then Solar and Energy Efficiency Loan Program, Compost Up Downtown Program, and then the recent March 16th BCOS Addressing the Climate Crisis event, and then touch on upcoming climate engagement platform that will be launched in April or May, and then the update to council, which is in the process of being scheduled. And just to kind of ground ourselves into how this relates to the Climate Action Plan, SEAL, the Solar and Energy Efficiency Loan Program, and the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program were created to address the Climate Action Plan goals to increase distributed renewable energy across the community and to increase energy efficiency citywide. So both of those programs address those Climate Action Plan goals, which are EB1 and EB2. Compost Up Downtown is the first program that is meant to address increasing solid waste diversion by 30%. And then the other efforts that are ongoing will be part of the broader council update. But across the organization, each part of the Climate Action Plan has different sections of implementation. So some things that for perhaps like future discussion would be discussions about the transportation demand management efforts that are ongoing right now, possible discussion in the future second quarter meeting about the Green Ribbon panel, and then how the local income tax and general obligation bonds help support developing new mechanisms for financing city climate action plan implementation. So the first program was launched in the third quarter of last year, and that's the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program. The focus of this program is on the residential sector. So this is anyone that is a homeowner within Bloomington city limits. The focus of this program is to address some financing gaps. So over the course of the last 5 years, as Solarize Bloomington has provided a group buy opportunity, there is still a gap for those that are not able to use their home equity line of credit or don't have an existing banking relationship to help make the purchase of solar and other energy efficiency investments more affordable. At this point, we have 2 different lenders participating in the program. Hoosier Hills Credit Union is local and started solar lending last year in May and are now a program partner. And Clean Energy Credit Union was an existing lender that's based out of Colorado that does lending for both the green home improvements and solar. So anyone that's a participant in the program starts with step 1 by filling out an intake form. We check to make sure that they're in city limits, and then they're eligible for a reduced rate lending opportunity after getting eligibility confirmation. At that point, they get a quote from a qualified contractor. So for instance, if I'm interested in getting solar, I'll get a quote for solar for my home, and then the person decides what their lending needs are at that point. So they could finance a portion of the solar, they could finance the whole solar installation, and then they complete the loan application, get approved for the loan, complete the project, and then if their household income is $100,000 or below, then in order to increase sort of equity of solar ownership and affordability for these types of projects, they submit a rebate verification form, and then we provide them with a $1,000 rebate. So it's a little bit complicated sounding, but basically, like, if anyone's interested, I'm available to answer questions for them, provide feedback about whether this is a good fit for their needs. Some people don't need lending for their solar project, and so I'm able to point them to other contractors that work in the area to get solar. Some people are not interested in solar, but they're interested in other portions of what can be financed through the program, like electric vehicle chargers or HVAC or Energy Star appliances. So if you're interested in making a smaller investment in your energy performance, then those are great options. At this point in time, we've had 60 applicants over the last 6 months, so it's a pretty good rate, but I intend to also do more outreach over the course of the year and go to events, city events like Blooming Neighborhoods in the fall, and do more neighborhood association presentations over the course of the summer as well. So
Is improving the building envelope, like the insulation and stuff like that, would that kind of investment also qualify?
So weatherization is eligible as well. And sometimes people don't know where to start, so I usually point them to, there's a free Duke energy assessment, and then you can also get a more in-depth assessment through Duke for an additional $50, and that will help them figure out, specific to their home, what's draining the most from their utility bill and what has the best chance of providing a return on investment for them. So,
May I ask, what's
Yeah.
the city, how does the city, how are they involved with that?
Yeah.
I know you are part of coordinating it, but how does the city encourage that or advocate for that? What's their role
Sure.
in it?
So this is the first municipal lending program that Clean Energy Credit Union set up with any city. So they had existing programs for lending with counties and states, but I worked with them to do, it's a little bit complicated, but basically purchase down the interest rate. So anyone that's participating in this program gets a cheaper interest rate than they would if they were getting lending, just sort of like as part of a credit union customer. So that's part of how the city's involved in that we've provided that upfront investment.
City subsidizes the buy down of
Yeah,
the
city subsidizes the
rate?
buy down,
Okay.
and then we're also supporting rebates. So that helps make it more affordable. Let's say I'm a sort of middle income household, and this type of project would be out of reach normally. That's where if my income is below 100,000 in a year, then we're providing that additional 1,000. So if, for instance, I was purchasing like a Energy Star appliance and that's coming in at about 5,000 and I want to finance 3,000 of that, then you can apply that rebate amount that the city's providing and it makes the project 20% less
And is there a
expensive.
certain cap on the amount per annum that the city provides for that program?
Yeah, there's a program budget. So for American Rescue Plan funds for this year, I think it was about 100,000. So it's just based on when projects get completed, and if it's not dispersed by the end of the year, it will revert. So we're funded until the end of this year. So it was ongoing for about 6 months of last year, and then throughout the course of this year, and then we'll kind of see what the support looks like moving forward. Yeah.
But for this calendar year, it was 100,000.
hmm I can double check that, but
And if somebody is trying to invest in Energy Star appliances, for example, is there is it only the cost difference between a cheapo, not energy efficient appliance and a high-end, very efficient appliance? Is it only the cost difference that can qualify, or the whole thing?
so the loan amount is based on the cost of the appliance, so that's the collateral for the loan. So sometimes people decide that the increased upfront cost is more than they are willing to invest. Like, for instance, someone contacted and said the high efficiency furnace cost me a certain amount more, and that's more than I want to pay at this point in time. And so that's sort of like an individual financial decision at that point. But if you look at the total cost of ownership for a more efficient appliance, that's where you have a better sort of idea of how much it's going to save you over the life of it as well. So that's part of sort of just answering people's questions, and that's true with a lot of things that are more efficient. The upfront cost can be higher, but you'll recoup that over time.
But the loan can be used
Mhm.
for the full amount
Yeah.
of the appliance.
Yeah. It just can't be for more than the collateral's worth. So you can't borrow more than the quote would be for the appliance. So, yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned 60 applicants in 6 months. Do you know like the rate of folks who actually follow through then and end up either making use of the financing option or benefiting from the rebate?
Yeah. So people are at various stages of their application, and so occasionally I'm sending up a follow-up email to ask them if they didn't continue, why. So at this point, we've processed 7 rebate applications. That means that whatever they purchase, whether it's solar or otherwise, is installed, their loan's closed. And then I also get a report each month from the bank that says this is the number of loans that are closed. And so some of the people that I followed up with said, I realized that I didn't need the lending. I don't want to take out a loan at this point in time. Especially, I think, with the pandemic, people are a little nervous about making large financial decisions right now. So that's part of the follow-up, is to see why people didn't follow through. And then for the most part, the people that have finished have said, I wouldn't have had access to the ability to do this project at this point in time. So that's been good that it's meeting that need at this point in time.
Great.
Yep. So in the interest of time, I'll move on to the next one, but if you have extra questions, we can do those at the end as well. So the next one's solar and energy efficiency loan program, SEAL for short. Similar partner in that Hoosier Hills is partnering to provide lending as well. IFF is based out of Chicago, and they're the ones that are completing the energy assessments, and I'll speak to their role in a second. And then CDFI Friendly has been a great program partner in helping identify and connect applicants with the program. So this program is specifically for not-for-profits, schools, early childhood centers, libraries, healthcare facilities, and grocery stores. So these projects are larger than a residential project. They are solar and energy efficiency related. And so if any organization is tax exempt or categorized as a 501c4 or 501c6, they're eligible to participate. This addresses the need. A lot of these solar tax credits are not available if you're tax exempt, so it helps create an ability to finance and get connected with financing for large-scale solar and energy efficiency projects. The types of projects that are eligible are similar to the Green Home Improvement Program, but the list is a bit shorter in that it's LED conversion or upgrades, Energy Star appliances, ventilation and cooling upgrades like HVAC replacement as long as it's Energy Star certified, solar PV installation or upgrades, water heater, insulation or weatherization, and then other projects as recommended by their facility energy assessment. So when organizations complete their interest in participating, they say what types of projects they're interested in implementing through this program, and then part of what they get as part of what they receive as a program participant is also the facility energy assessment. So their final project selection is determined pending the results. So let's say that I'm a nonprofit and I say I'm really interested in solar, and then we complete the facility energy assessment and find out that their facility is very energy inefficient, make the recommendation that they prioritize something else first to improve their building performance before they get solar.
And who does that assessment?
That's IFF. So they have a certified. It's It's just an abbreviation that doesn't. They're a CDFI, Community Development Financing Institution, and they have someone that's qualified to do commercial energy assessments. So anyone that participates provides the in-kind $3,000 energy efficiency assessment. So I confirm that they are qualified nonprofit, and then work with them to schedule the facility energy assessment. So that means the assessor comes in, looks at the full facility, looks at the type of equipment that they have, looks at their utility bills, and models what the reductions can be if they do certain types of improvements. That really helps narrow the conversation about prioritizing the project types. And City of Bloomington sponsors that assessment cost. At that point, have a project review meeting with them and say, let's talk about the energy assessment and what it said about your facility and what types of projects would be the most effective to receive the matching grant. That's also, we have $10,000 matching grants provided by the City of Bloomington, and they can't exceed 50% of total cost. So we're trying to incentivize organizations using their own matching funds to increase the impact of their total project. So for most of these types of projects, they are going to come in at $20,000 or more anyway. If you're purchasing an HVAC and doing weatherization, adds up pretty quickly. And at this point, it's their option to either finance the remainder themselves or through lending, which we can connect them to. And so the loan, the L and seal is optional, but if you find out that you have needs for lending, then we have lenders that are participating. To this point, nobody has taken lending to cover the other costs of their match, but it could happen for this year's participants. Then this is just a basically flow chart. People ask questions, they complete the intake form. We will be able to support 12 organizations this year, supported 11 last year. They sign a good faith commitment letter saying, if we receive this energy assessment from the city, financed by the city of Bloomington, we commit to completing a project as long as it makes sense. So then they send their bills, we do the on-site energy assessment, and then I sit down with them, the energy assessor, and we review the findings and discuss their project goals. What are they trying to accomplish and what is prioritized, and then they go to the contractor and get a project quote. So let's say that, for instance, I'm interested in lighting, then I would go to the lighting contractor and figure out what the exact project amount will be. Then we sign the grant agreement, funds are dispersed, and then when the project install is complete, I go back, do a walkthrough, check it out, take pictures, ask follow-up questions, and then after it's been installed for 6 months, we check to see the amount of impact on their utility bills. So depending on what the project type is, it can have a pretty significant decrease in utility costs, and that's the idea behind the program, is to help reduce that for the nonprofit, to increase their viability of operations, and to also have the climate benefit of reducing electricity use. And then just to sort of highlight, these were the 2021 participants. This program has been going for 6 months longer than the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program. So I started this last February. So we had South Central Community Action Program, Project School, Warehouse, Monroe County Public Library, Amethyst House, Windfall Dancers, Artisan Alley, Stone Belt, First United Church, WFHB, and Bloomington Center for Global Children. And then the applications just closed for the first group for this year, and so we'll be moving forward with Wonder Lab and then one other participant, and then we'll be accepting up to 12 this year. So people's projects are in various states of completion depending on whether there were, back orders for supplies, but everyone's moving forward, and it's been a really great way to help try to match city funding with what their facility needs are in a more customized way, instead of being more prescriptive and saying our program's only covering X type of improvement. So,
Do you know whether any of the social service agencies on the list asked for CDBG or Jack Hopkins funds for their portion? Was there any overlap there?
So I checked with Han to see what the list was of unfunded programs or projects as well, to see if I could reach out to some of those social service agencies that weren't funded through that CDBG funding as well. So I have the list, and a lot of them are similar similar to this list in terms of like who has applied for both, but it was for slightly different things as well. So for those that didn't have their request funded this year, I am going to reach out as well to see if this program's a good fit for what their funding needs are at this point in time.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering in particular if any agency kind of got the city to pay for all of it by saying, okay, I got CDBG funds for my 10,000, and then I'm going to get the city match.
Nobody's done
I don't know
that.
if that's
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
would be allowed, or
I suppose they could. I mean, I haven't had that happen yet, but the timing has been off, I think, enough that people have made separate requests for different things through both programs. But it's something I'm keeping an eye on, because there is a lot of similarities between the physical improvement funding through CDBG and this program, but this is a bit more restricted because it needs to have a utility cost impact, so.
I don't recall any request through Jack Hopkins that specifically said anything about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what the top project category or two is? Like, are there any trends yet about kind of what's most impactful for folks?
I think especially with COVID, the HVAC upgrades have been considered by every organization and funded for several of them. It also, I think, is going to have more of an impact that's showing in the summer with the decreased air conditioning costs as well. So waiting 6 months, since most of them were installed in the winter, it's a little bit difficult right now to see what the decrease in their utility cost is going to be. And also, not every facility was 100% open. So when the warehouse did their lighting conversion, they did that while they were still closed. And then it was active when they reopened in December. So oftentimes people start and they're interested in solar, and then based on their roof size, the total cost of the project is going to be outside of what they're prepared to pay for at that point in time. But I think moving forward, keeping an open conversation with them to see if it's the right point in time for them later as well. So there's been, with any of these organizations, I also try to match them if there's a utility rebate or utility financing. So Monroe County Public Library was able to use the $10,000 grant in coordination with a Duke Energy Efficiency as a Service program. So they were able to finance the entire 100% conversion and just buy down the amount of time with the grant before they own their lights. So instead of being 4 years, I think, before they would own their LED lights, it's now going to be 3, and it's going to save the library a pretty significant amount immediately, because they would have only been able to replace a couple of lights at a time. So
Is there? Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, I was going to say, and I probably have asked this question before, so you'll pardon me. In jumping back in, there's no grant type program that the city has for residential customers. There's no like component of that. And if you will, can you say to me what the rationale is that, I get why I think this is great.
yeah.
Why isn't that component in with residential customers as well?
I mean, I would say that the rebate serves as a grant. It's capped at 1,000, but it's basically just because the need exceeds the funding. So the grant for these community-based organizations is spread across a broader clientele that they're serving. So by reducing utility costs for these organizations, they can reinvest that savings into their community programs. I think especially if you're looking at residential sector, lower income, that is by necessity going to need to be grant-based. And so some of the other community programs like Solar for All are able to serve a small number of people a year with solar based on their funding source, but there is a potential, I think, to grow that depending on what public investment's available for that. So none of these programs would have been possible if it wasn't for the opportunity that the American Rescue Plan funds provided, but that isn't to say that there isn't the possibility for other programs moving forward or expansion of these, creation of new ones.
Yeah, I keep hoping Indiana will jump on the bandwagon and somehow invest more money in helping individuals in apartments or homes or whatever to get solar on their roofs.
Yeah, so back in 2020,
They're holding up the bandwagon,
I think so.
stopping it.
yeah, I think back in 2020, as part of the first tranche of Recover Forward, there was a $100,000 grant that ESC provided to South Central Community Action Program to help match their federal weatherization funding. And so they're spending that down across different projects and being able to improve energy efficiency for people that would not have otherwise qualified or they would have run out of funds for. So there's things like that where I think it can be scaled up and finding the clientele that need it.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Next is new program, and this one's compost related. This is a partnership with Earth Keepers, local company. And this program, Compost Up Downtown, is focused on restaurant and food service businesses downtown in the Bloomington Arts and Entertainment District. And so that encompasses over 100 restaurants in the downtown area. And the focus of this program was based on a compost report that the Monroe County Solid Waste District funded several years ago that showed that we have various areas of downtown that have larger concentrations of food waste, and it identified specifically that grocery stores and restaurants were the largest producers. So trying to start there for the greatest impact and working with restaurants to get started on composting service. So participants in the program basically start with a waste audit. So figure out like how is food being wasted and what types of food. Are there ways to improve kitchen operations to reduce the amount of food that's being wasted, as well as facilitating the actual diversion of that waste through weekly collections of hot stamped rollers, the drop off of 5-gallon buckets and pails, and working with the kitchen staff on training and staff training. So since it's all sort of bundled together, the program provides 3 months of subsidized service, after which the restaurant can decide whether to maintain or continue composting service with Earth Keepers. The waste audit itself includes a staff training session, so training anyone that's in the kitchen about how to compost, what's compostable, Q&A for owners and staff, and presentation. And then discussions with staff to identify common composting contaminants. So if things are getting thrown in the bucket that aren't compostable, talking about why those things aren't compostable and what should be composted. And then also as a component is working with the restaurants to determine proper or best bin placement. So some of the downtown restaurants have limited space in their kitchen, so working with them to determine where's the best place to put the composting collection. The idea behind this program as well is to help reduce the amount of overhead or food waste that restaurants are experiencing, which reduce costs. And then if they can work on diverting that to composting, then they can reduce the amount of landfill waste that they're producing and reduce their bin size for that. Just briefly, we're just getting started. So we have several restaurants that submitted their intake forms last week, and so I'll be able to provide more updates about how this is going later in the year, but intending to do more outreach with downtown restaurants and working with them to figure out what point in the year they want to get started. So we have funding to support 16. The first group is full, and then work with 3 other cohorts between now and beginning next January. So nobody's gotten started yet, but since not very many restaurants have current compost subscriptions with anyone, I think this is an area that is going to be pretty high impact with climate action plan implementation. So any questions about this one?
What types of metrics will you be tracking with regard to, I don't know, reduced costs, reduced waste, as well as aggregate amounts of compost, that sort of thing?
So as part of the application, we ask, how much are they paying right now for trash service, which provides the ability to consult about possible reductions. If they currently have recycling service, just to look at their overall waste profile. And then we are also going to be looking at every month, Earth Keepers provides an impact report. And so we get that also at the city of Bloomington. So we weigh the tonnage of composting diverted, and then we'll be able to aggregate that over the course of the 3 months. after the end of the trial period, we'll also be asking them closeout questions, not only to improve the design of the program, but to look at if they decide to not continue, was that cost related? Was it other reasons that resulted in them not continuing service? So the 3-month subsidy kind of reduces the upfront barriers to getting started while also making sure that it's a good period of time where they have adequate training to make sure they're set up for success as well. So I think there's some quantitative metrics in terms of like actual tonnage reduced, but then there's also, I think, the qualitative feedback from program participants about how it's helped them meet their restaurant's needs as well. So ask them, how is this program to help you fulfill your mission as a restaurant? And for many restaurants, I think they're interested in also helping be part of something as a group as well. So I reached out to the chamber and Downtown Bloomington Inc. And I think as we get more participants, there will be a network benefit of helping demonstrate that the restaurant industry is helping lead in food waste reduction.
Is there an estimate of how many restaurants they have the capacity that the city and Earth Keepers have the capacity to have participate in this?
16 with current funding. If that increased, then we could serve more. There's also the possibility in future years that we can switch to another area of town or widen the participation, but it seems like a good place to start because there's more visibility as well for tourists, other people to learn about composting that may just be visitors in Bloomington, and see that a restaurant's participating in composting. So I think in the past there's been conversations about, green business certifications. We'll have decals that show I'm participating in Compost Up, and I think it's a great opportunity to have a large concentration of businesses that are composting in one area before we switch. Otherwise, it would be a bit challenging for collection reasons as well to be picking up from one area and then another area. So we're reducing emissions by restricting the collection route as well to make it more efficient.
Is it $75,000 that's being invested in this project, or how much? What is the
I
price tag on
will double check and let you know. Yeah.
it? It's ARPA funded as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 75. Yeah.
Yeah, all these things that are ARPA funded, and I'm thinking, well, if we want to continue them, we're
Yeah.
going to need another source.
Yeah. So at this point, it's pilot, it's proof of concept, but this is an area that like city sanitation doesn't serve commercial customers anyway. So we're helping provide an incentive for composting service.
Sorry if I missed this.
No.
You mentioned the upfront subsidy to get folks started. What is the monthly cost? Is it based on size? Oh, thank you. Oh, that's what it's valued at, the incentive. But
Yeah.
what's their cost ultimately?
If they decide to continue, they'll get a discounted quote, and that can be scalable based on the amount of waste they're producing. So, like, for instance, Earth Keepers has a variety of different commercial kitchens as customers. They have everyone from Chick-fil-A to, like, Small Favors. And so the quote is going to be based on your generation. And restaurants may also decide we're going to offset X amount of our waste just based on what they can afford as well. So I think it will be scalable based on their generation as well.
Okay. So is it meant to be cost competitive or even better than what they're what the reduction from that's no longer going to the landfill? Are they supposed to come out cost neutral or better, or is it expecting at some level them to buy into the social purpose and maybe pay a little bit more?
Ideally, it would be cost neutral. I think it also depends on how much they've reduced total food waste generation. So there's a little bit, everyone has a different commercial trash hauler depending on where you are. So there's a little bit of, I'm not sure what their cost structure is for their trash, for instance, but if they are reducing the amount of food that they're purchasing and wasting, then that will be cost neutral with the cost of their composting service.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of moving
Yeah,
parts.
that's part of the waste audit as well,
Yeah.
to identify near-term opportunities to reduce food waste and spoilage. So I think during that process, typically restaurants have not had a lot of visibility into what's getting thrown away, and that creates the ability to figure out, okay, we're wasting a lot of carrots. You probably don't need to be purchasing as many carrots as before, and that sort of overhead cost reduction covers the cost of the composting service.
Sorry, I smiled. It was hard not to think of like figurative carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
Literal carrots.
Yeah.
I love the decal idea too, like potential for consumers to ask about it if they don't see it at a favorite restaurant, and
Yeah.
yeah, I like that.
So as people are confirmed, we'll have a running list as well, and include those that are already Earthkeepers customers as well. So they will have a profile on the Earthkeepers website as well. Right now on the bottom there's a scrolling thing that shows which commercial customers they have. So it's a growing list, and yeah. So that's this one.
May I ask you a question
Yeah.
about, is there any hook into any university and the waste that they produce? Is there any of this that kind of dovetails with what they do?
Yeah, so Sustainable has been focusing on a lot in relation to their waste reduction and standardization on campus. I think there's also an opportunity to do education with students as they transition from campus to apartment or off-campus
I was
housing.
thinking about food hall.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
In the larger scale production of things that happen.
Yeah.
That might even be easier to control than each individual
Yeah.
student.
I think that most dining halls are composting, but I'm not sure which ones on campus are, so I could.
And it's not hooked up to our program, right?
No.
It would be what they do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so IU diverts green waste, and then I think they've been increasing the amount of waste that's composted as well. And then in certain other buildings on campus as well have composting service, depending on what the building is.
Oh, good. I didn't know that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if they also compost in the kitchens and not just the waste after
Yeah.
post-consumer waste.
I could ask. I have a standing meeting with them as well, so. And then I'll be probably relatively brief with this, but on the 16th, the Commission on Sustainability invited some special guests from Environmental Justice Solutions, which is based out of Oakland, to speak to their engagement process with citizens in Oakland about equity and climate action plan implementation. And as a town hall format, it was hybrid. The majority of attendees were on Zoom, but we had about 12 in the audience. We had about 60 total attendees, and then most people stayed the entire hour and a half, 2 hours. And so the next steps in debriefing this are we're going to meet with them and talk about recommendations and use this as a way to begin a conversation about equity and climate action plan implementation, and then give an update at the next Bloomington Commission on Sustainability meeting in April. So it was the first commission event that's happened for quite a while because of COVID, and in general, and it was recorded as well on CATS. So for those that weren't able to attend, there is a retention of that record as well. So good, I think, feedback, good conversation in the breakouts as well. And so kept those notes, and we're going to put them together in a memo, and I think probably circulate that either with this committee or, I don't know, we'll figure out what the appropriate next steps are with that.
Yeah, Matt and I were both
Yeah.
attendants. Were you?
I think the presentations were excellent. Very good. Our climate action plan does integrate equity in a lot of portions of it, but I did appreciate the framework and kind of comprehensiveness and centering of that approach and their plan. Though it sounds like they have some maybe challenges with implementation too, and
Sure, yeah.
maintaining buy-in. So I'll be curious to see what recommendations are, and thinking about how SAPs and CAPs evolve over time, right? And how do we iterate on these documents? Obviously, it's pretty new, but
Yeah.
are there equity tools or layers that we can bring to it, how we approach actions, making sure that we're asking these sets of questions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think they're both living documents, and so, especially with the climate action plan planning process occurring during the pandemic, there are still plenty of people in the community that aren't familiar with it, haven't engaged with goals or ideas, and haven't had the opportunity to weigh in on what their own priorities are. So that will be, continuing open conversation with the public on that. Even back in January to March of 2020, there were hundreds of responses to the climate survey. And so those people that responded, re-engaging with them also as we move forward, and especially kind of moving into the conversation about reporting to council, making sure that that's accessible to the public and in a format that's helpful for them. So I guess just briefly, climate engagement platform will be launching. What that is basically, if I'm a resident or a group and I'm interested in taking action on climate, you can create a profile on a web page, and then it will be kind of a menu of different items that you can do and their CO2 benefit. So, for instance, you can click start composting, and there will be information about what composting is, how that connects to the climate action plan, what the CO2 benefit is, and then you can check off things that you've done, and it will aggregate the impact of that across the community. So several other communities have used this platform, including Fort Collins, and working on getting the site up, and then we'll launch basically an engagement period to get people registered and active. So this provides an opportunity for anyone that's contacting the city saying, I really want to take action on climate, and I'm an individual, I'm not an organization or otherwise, what can I do? And then a way for us to track what people are doing in a way that's measurable as well. So we can track number of households, engagement by council districts, and keep adding resources to it as well. So if there's a new, rebate program that launches or a new program, add that to the site, and that people can learn about it in a more integrated fashion of what connects to them. This is another thing that I think will be really helpful in talking to neighborhoods, because they can create a neighborhood profile, and each group can be part of that, and you can have challenges across the community, challenges between the community and a campus community. And so it sort of takes what is a very technical document in the plan and sort of makes it a lot more accessible for someone that wants to get engaged maybe every now and then on certain items and figure out how to implement them for themselves.
Can that be linked with social media?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that people can
get
alerts when there's new things?
Yeah, so different communities have handled it a little bit differently. Fort Collins is called Shift. They have challenges across the year, and so one of them was over the course of 6 months, and they were pushing things out to social media. We're shifting to reducing vehicle trips, and here's how we're tracking that, and we want you to get involved. And so it's a messaging way to get people to engage with the CAP plan goals as well, and take that down to the scale of each person and what's feasible for them to work on. It's a lot easier to aggregate and see what the impact is. For instance, at the event, we know how many people came, but then it's more difficult to track what happened afterwards. So this will help in keeping that in one place as well. So council can log in and see, here's, or just see on the main page, here's how many households are signed up, here's what the carbon impact has been. And then when we get to scheduling, probably later in the year, you might be interested to hear from my colleague Jeff on transportation demand management piece as well. But I think there will be other programs that I speak to later in the year as well, but I'll probably close out of this.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
I don't think you had on your list there, but I'd had on my agenda or on the agenda for the evening, just general sustainability action plan and climate action plan tracking and reporting to council. So we just kind of covered that engagement platform. That's one way to collect data and report and track what's happening, right, with community, sort of household scale participation. Obviously, you're collecting data and tracking these particular programs you shared. How do we plan to track and communicate around implementation of actions and achievement of goals and strategies within the plan, that kind of like comprehensive overall level?
So I think one way is through the Cabinet Climate Action Team, and since that was convened before COVID, working to sort of, I met with all the department heads in January to talk about what their departments are doing and what they're expecting to achieve in that year, and then working with them to codify what our 2022 city operations work plan is and how that relates to the climate action plan. And so I expect that as part of the report to council that's going to occur in April and May, to include that with a corollary between what the city program is and then what the relating cap plan goal is. Everything's in phases in the climate action plan, and so breaking that reporting into phase 1 tracking, and then if anything gets prioritized as in other phases, working on that. But I think generally from the perspective of public consumption, because there's so many different individual actions, making sure that we're reporting on the ones that are moving forward while providing context about why others may not be moving forward at this point in time. Right now it's a matching process between available funding, partnerships, and results. And I'm open to feedback about the best ways to communicate that as well. I think part of the difficulty is creating something that is, rigorous enough to be interest to council members while also creating something that's publicly accessible. And so, for instance, in the greenhouse gas inventory, there were 2 separate pieces of reporting. One was a technical report and one was an executive summary. And I think that's sort of the direction that I'd like to move towards for April and May, with a supporting appendix with the chart.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I think in my mind's eye, I'm envisioning, it doesn't have to look like this at all, but I'm envisioning, you shared with us a spreadsheet that collects all of the actions organized by goal and strategy, right, across chapters or sectors for the SAP and CAP, as well as the phases. So it's kind of this hierarchy that we can break down and eventually have an Excel row for each item, and there's hundreds of them with kind of a rough time frame. So I'm thinking, ideally, I'd like something that's not yet started, achieved, or not everything's achieved. Some are programs that need to keep happening, right? Or a collection of programs will be going to meet a certain goal of waste reduction, for instance. So, some sort of short notes, a couple sentences about, is this in progress? Has it not started? Have we considered it and decided it's not feasible for some reason? Just collecting that information. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a public document, because again, balancing this, well, obviously they're all public access via request if folks want them. I just mean you don't necessarily need to message this front and center on the sustainability page, because it is a level of granularity that not everyone's interested in. I'm thinking specifically of council member purposes for accountability, our own ability to make informed decisions about funding priorities. Let's talk, Mayor's revenue proposal includes $1.5 million for climate action plan implementation. Is that enough? Is it too much? Trying to make those decisions based on, okay, how are we doing vis-a-vis the plan, the timelines, the number of actions versus what we've been able to accomplish? Do we have staff capacity? Do we have funding? Are there other barriers that we haven't thought about, et cetera? Does that all make sense? And is that kind of what you meant by...
So I think integrating it to have the same labels as the Trello 6-month reports as well is kind of the direction that I'm thinking of going, because those reflect the categories that you were speaking to, which is, delayed because of COVID, pause due to COVID, not started, accomplished, substantively accomplished, because those have very specific meanings, and that means that it would be consistent across the organization as well. I think with the biannual reporting, not everything moves forward within a 6-month time frame either, so that's important to note on the spreadsheet as well, as whether it's a multi-year or a continuous re-engagement process. I think that's been a little bit confusing sometimes when we're talking about whether something has moved forward, because some things like invasive removal, you're going to continually be re-engaging, and so that's a year-over-year city investment versus a one-time project with a certain time frame. So I don't think that's beyond the capacity to work towards. At least an annual update of that, I think, is reasonable.
So this is like a Trello-based spreadsheet that will kind of communicate on this information.
Yeah,
acknowledging some of
so
these nuances.
that's where I'm envisioning that we move towards with climate action teams. So our next meeting is April 9th. And so moving towards that, what's our annual work plan for the city? Finding better ways to collect information about what's happening in the community as well. Right now it's a little bit difficult to track that, and there's a lot of good stories to be told as to what other organizations are doing. I think that will be improved as well when the Green Ribbon Panel convenes in collecting and aggregating those sorts of metrics.
Got it. And we haven't seen a version of that yet, right? This is in development. Okay.
Yeah, that one Excel sheet was just overwhelming.
Well, yeah, I think that's
I'm still working from it. I'm like organizing it and like.
Yeah, Matt likes it.
I'm merging cells to like have a vision. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge, because as with any sort of like strategic plan, having greater education about the zoomed out version so that everyone knows like what are the categories, what are the strategies, and then for those people that want to dig into what's the specific action, that's also available. And so that's where I think breaking it down between something that's in the appendix and something that is in the body of the report might be more helpful for a communications perspective. And I think that's also the benefit of meeting in committee as well, is to get into greater granularity versus a full council presentation, which is just a zoomed out, how are we doing generally, check-in.
Well, and thank you very much for that Word document that kind of focuses on council actions. That's very helpful.
Which I'd like to get to. If there's no more questions on tracking and reporting, we can wrap up this portion of the agenda and move on to a couple of committee member items that we had flagged, and then mine includes, this kind of legislative priorities and looking at what council's role is in this beyond general oversight and that sort of thing. So moving on to item A under agenda item 3, Isabel, did you want to share what you had in mind about either recycling requirements or waste reduction?
Yeah, so I had shared via email that just to remind, since you two were not on council at the time, but several years ago, Councilmember Sturbaum, Mayor, and I spent, 18 months investigating with Stacey Jane Rhodes of the council office, investigating the possibility of a requirement for multifamily buildings to have recycling pickup. So we were envisioning that the requirement would be that they have a contract with a private hauler to pick up recycling, at least once a week or whatever is reasonable for the size. And so we spent a lot of time on it, and then checked with the AIM, Association of Cities and Towns, and their state lobbyists said, if you bring this legislation, the Indiana state legislature will almost certainly preempt you and say you can't do it. So that's when we dropped it. But I just think that's such a huge waste in a city like Bloomington, where we have so many renters and so many multi-unit buildings that are not getting city services. Anything over 4 units is not that I want to revisit that and see if there's any appetite among council members, and also I would want to talk with the mayor to revisit this and forge ahead, even if it might prompt the General Assembly to squash us.
What would they squash us on,
So,
if I may ask?
what was that, Ron?
On what basis would they squash us on enacting that?
Well, they would just say, oh, well, now in the state of Indiana, it's illegal to require private property owners to have recycling pickup.
Property rights, there you go. Any
Property.
justification under the sun, right?
Yeah, right, that's right.
I think Council Lucas might have something to add. I know there's been some inquiry with
Sure,
AIM.
I think the way they might do it is similar to the plastic bag ban. I know that it doesn't just cover plastic bags, but they essentially added a statute to the home rule portion of state code that says one of the powers that's withheld from cities is the power to enact a statute that governs X. So they would likely, that's my assumption, that they might say cities don't have the authority to enact a statute that does what we're trying to do, or might try to do.
Are there constitutionality issues there with special legislation if you can adequately demonstrate that this is targeting us specifically?
It would apply generally. I mean, we might be the motivation behind it, but
As long as it's of general applicability, it's like kind of a okay.
As long as it doesn't name us, I think they can do it.
Well, there were, I forget who sent an email around about this. It was maybe you, Stephen, or Heather. Somebody looked into this with AIM again recently, Accelerating Municipalities, and it seems like in the interim, a couple of communities have had at least some level, maybe it's not a blanket requirement, but some level of multifamily housing requirement of recycling. Some smaller communities somewhere that are possibly just flying under the radar and they haven't made anyone angry. So it hasn't gone to the General Assembly. So there's that wrinkle. I also wanted to add, it's a different landscape than it was even a few years ago. And I wonder if you've got associations or folks on board, there's recycling coalitions at the state level that may have broader bipartisan support from, state legislators that we could be in touch with and maybe get their input on approach. But the other would be something like the Monroe County Apartment Association. And if we can find the right fit, of maybe I don't know, maybe it starts with incentives and it's a phase-in to a mandate over years. I don't know what that program design looks like, but if you can actually get the potentially affected stakeholders, the ones who may, go to a state legislator to request preemption, if you can get them on board and supportive, we can probably stand a much better chance.
We did talk to, I remember talking to the Monroe County Apartment Association. I think I attended one of their board meetings or something.
There are materials back from 2017 or 2016. The Apartment Association, I think the Chamber, they've been a group that was reached out to. So certainly if members are interested in picking this back up, I'd recommend, thinking through what outreach you'd want to engage in, both externally and internally. This, I think, is something that, would involve multiple departments potentially in the city. So,
Was the Apartment Association adamantly against it?
Not adamantly. They had various concerns about how much it would cost them and all that, but
It'd also
it wasn't a categorical rejection.
it'd be good to get the data as well from them. Maybe that prompts them to survey members just to understand the landscape. Is it 20% or 80% that are offering recycling now? Do we have any sense of that? I don't.
I think actually Joseph Winnie has
Do you know?
done some
Yeah.
research on that.
I did some basic legwork and set up a spreadsheet and started reaching out to apartment management offices and started just polling on behalf of the Commission on Sustainability. Fall of the year before this passed, it was 2019 then. It's not complete, but it does have, so far, I think the greatest concern was just cost there were probably about 50 respondents or so out of, I want to say there was about 250 to 300 management facilities in the spreadsheet. So that could be continued and seemed like, at least from the responses that I was getting, a viable way to get that sort of ground level information on what the current services offered are. There was a survey that just asked probably 6 or 7 really basic questions about, do you provide it, who's your service provider, and if you don't, why don't you?
Got it. Thanks. And for the benefit of any members of the public who are watching and couldn't hear that from a mic, we have a member of the Commission on Sustainability who's done some data tracking on his own, who was sharing updates from that. So yeah, I don't have more to add necessarily. I definitely support revisiting the topic. I'm not sure I'll be the one to spearhead it, but I can support.
If the question is, what do I think about that, getting the association to do a survey of their members?
No, just in
Sorry.
general, do you think that, would you be in favor of pursuing a requirement for multifamily residences to have recycling pickup?
Yes. Sure.
I mean, and then the other question is, would this committee be the logical place to develop such legislation?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe this goes to my items around legislative priorities. I don't think this committee, we could have, a weekly work session when we're working on something actively to meet and work on something. But I was envisioning this more as the organizing platform, both gathering information and reporting from Lauren, but also coordinating our work. And then probably individual council members, possibly pairs of council members, whether members of this committee or not. 2 members of this committee would be sub-quorum, which would allow some flexibility in terms of, meeting with staff, meeting with stakeholders without having to notice meetings and all that, to do outreach. So if folks wanted to work in teams on legislative priorities from this committee, or again with other council members who are interested, to do a little bit more of that, legwork on the development of an ordinance, and doing that research, that to me seems like a better approach than convening this committee as a public meeting for every step of a legislative process. That's a little prohibitive, maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense. But this, if I worked with one other council member or worked with Mr. Winnie or whoever to develop the legislation, this makes sense as a first stop before it goes to the full council, right? To get feedback from you all. And
I think either way, I'm open to that as chair. I think whether or not it would be referred to this committee after introduction, like after a first reading, or whether or not you would prefer to workshop it in committee prior to introducing it, prior to bringing it to the council, I think either of those approaches could work. The former, obviously, depending on a vote of the council at a regular session. But
I think it would just be a stronger piece of legislation vis-a-vis our colleagues who are not on this committee. If this committee said, yes, we are behind this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that's popping into my head is that it seems to me like the idea of talking to the association again and saying, look, we're thinking about that this is what we are going to do. What is your body's reaction to that? I mean, if they go...
You mean AIM?
No, the apartment
The apartment
association.
association.
Sorry. If they say, we're not adamantly against that, but here's the parameters we would like on it, and it just, then it would, to me, it would give me an idea like, okay, well, that's doable without everybody freaking out and, just getting really upset, because that's, well, yeah, and so if we could get cooperation and some buy-in on like, okay, let's do it this way, or do a pilot program or whatever, or maybe they'll say we need some subsidy from the city and the climate groups that are in the city. Okay, I'm willing to hear all that to try to figure out what we could do, and then if we craft the legislation with respect to what they're thinking, then we'll have really a better chance of getting it all through. At least that's my thinking.
Yeah, it's worth exploring all that and understanding what their constraints are and their concerns and seeing how we can address them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go to an apartment association meeting with someone and say, look, here's what we're thinking.
And Stephen, do you have old notes and records that I could consult?
We do, and happy to make those available to anybody that's interested. If the committee wants to use this meeting structure as a venue to invite folks to come speak to you all, or have a conversation before taking the next steps. That's an option. I know, I think back in 2016 or 2017, it appears like there were some meetings with the apartment association, but I think that was more kind of one-on-one and with the council sponsors that were working on the legislation. So again, happy to help. And yeah, there are plenty of materials from those years. It looks like they got pretty far on the draft ordinance before deciding to back off. So I don't know how much has changed since then. I know we reached out to AIM again. Their take on the landscape hadn't changed. They were still concerned about state legislative preemption, but did mention some other communities that had programs that would have might be of interest to look at. So.
Well, I think my next step would be to talk to the mayor. Not that we need his support necessarily for any legislation, but because of this possible preemption, and my interest would be to challenge it, basically.
Sure.
And we need the legal department to, buy in to do that. So, so let me do that first, and then I can maybe reach out to all colleagues and see who wants to work on it.
Avoiding preemption would be better. But yes.
Pardon?
Avoiding preemption would be better.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Maybe city legal
Yeah.
has some view on that as well, but
Even unchallenged. I mean, it's still. I'm still in favor of considering passing something that we think or even know will be preempted, because we're not acting out of fear of preemption anyway. It's like, sure, if the General Assembly wants to say we don't support recycling, fine, they can own it. I don't know. Maybe nobody cares. Maybe some folks do, and it'll affect some swing races. Who knows? It's interesting. In the interest of time, did we want to move on to waste reduction, your other item there as well, Isabel?
I don't really have much on that is pressing, so we can just continue to yours.
Can you tell me more specifically what it's about?
It was just I've been thinking about composting for how to get the biggest bang for the buck with reducing organic waste, which of course in the landfill produces methane, is even worse than carbon dioxide, et cetera. And the Kessler report from 2018 showed up to 40% of what we're sending to landfill is organic waste. So the pilot program with the restaurants in the Bede District is excellent. I think that's definitely the direction that I'd like to go, is to focus on those big producers, the restaurants, the grocery stores. If we can reach out to the school district also, I bet there's a ton of organic waste that's going to the landfill from them, and then just on a residential level, I would encourage us to try to focus on neighborhood composting rather than having a diesel truck drive around and pick up. So it was just kind of some ideas that were bubbling in my head, and I don't really have anything concrete to propose today. So in the interest of time, unless you all want to add your bubbling ideas on this topic.
Actually, I'd love to, for just a few minutes, and hear maybe Lauren's opinion as well of any early scoping of residential programs. The idea of I know with the LEAF trial, for instance, we rewarded the winning neighborhood or two with potential access to a neighborhood pickup site for composting. Have any conversations happened or thinking about the idea of that, scaling? Maybe not every neighborhood to start, but at least around the city, 6 or 8 or 10 pickup sites that would be either free or very low barrier in some way for residences.
Yeah, so I think, like Isabel mentioned, the community drop-off cabinets are a good way to increase access to composting. In the last year, worked with Parks and Earthkeepers to get one at Switchyard and at Bryan Park. The community composting cabinet at Bryan Park has had a lot more drop-offs than the one at Switchyard, which makes sense. It's closer to a high density of residents. And then,
I didn't know about the
Oh,
one
yeah.
We live near Switchyard.
yeah,
I didn't know about it, so I don't know how
yeah.
well-known or publicized those have been.
Yeah. So I think that's also part of it. Now with the drop-off sites at the district, and there's drop-off sites, Switchyard, Bryan Park, trying to get one in the City Hall parking lot as well. So if you're going to farmer's market, bring your compost pail. That's $10 a month, so that's pretty low barrier, but it's obviously not free. So I think also just sitting down and thinking strategically about where there is not currently access, and if it's public property, trying to see if we can site one there, and then looking at possible other neighborhood sites as well. Because if we can just increase the total number, then that will create access in areas that there just isn't any right now.
But you're talking about subscription sites
Yeah.
with Earth Keepers.
Yeah.
I was thinking more about neighborhood sites, where somebody who's an avid gardener or something volunteers, hey, all my neighbors in these 3 blocks can come and put their compost here on my yard and I'll use it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can also come and get the compost and they can use it in their garden, so that there's no hauling of that compost. That's what I was thinking would be the ideal.
Yeah, I think it would just depend on.
If we could get HAND and the neighborhood associations in Kona.
Yeah, I think
on
it depends
board
on the
somehow.
type of waste and how it's being managed, and just making sure that the receptacle is suitable for that, so that it doesn't become a health problem for any reason.
Mm-hmm.
An attractive nuisance for rodents.
Yeah.
Right. And
It's a
if
legal
it's
joke for you, Steve.
And if it's an open compost area, like near, gardens or anything, isn't it going to be producing methane?
No, generally CO2 when things decompose in a compost setting. So, it's oxygenated, so it's decomposing with oxygen, aerobic decomposition, which produces primarily CO2. It's the anaerobic decomposition when there's no oxygen present that produces methane instead. So that's what happens in landfills because it's all trapped.
Because it's all trapped.
Or in closed system like waste management, like wastewater.
Good to know.
That can be captured and then burned for energy and ultimately release CO2 instead of methane. But it's easier to do in a closed system like a wastewater treatment facility, harder to do at a landfill. But I did want to ask about that.
Thank you.
The landfill we work with in Terre Haute area, they don't do any methane capture. Are we confident in that?
I don't think so.
Okay. I wonder what it would take to. It's another strategy to pursue, honestly. Yeah. Like, what is the barrier there? And it seems like they could and produce, do some waste to energy. Maybe it's capital investment. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely harder to incentivize someone in a different jurisdiction
Indeed.
to change their landfill management.
Indeed. Who has friends in Terre Haute? Okay. Well, I appreciate still a preliminary discussion on that topic and thinking a little more about what next steps could be.
Yes, I think there's in the general obligation bond also a line item for increasing our own city operations infrastructure for composting. Now that Good Earth is no longer accepting compost, so I think there's just a larger infrastructure piece to be had, both for larger scale and residential drop off.
All right. So, my final item here was 2022 legislative priorities from the Climate Action Plan, and I added UDO updates. I think those are actually mostly one and the same. There's overlap. There's UDO updates, essentially development code updates that would fall under the Climate Action Plan. There's probably a few additional UDO type things that could be done that would support climate action, specifically emissions reductions or resilience in some way that aren't in the cap. But for our purposes tonight, really I'm just talking about what do we want to tackle legislatively this year. Lauren had shared a 3-page Word document summarizing a lot of the things that called for legislation in some way or another to us, which I had circulated a few months ago. I'm also still working my way through the Excel spreadsheet and organizing some of that. There's just a few where I've thought council could maybe usefully be involved. that are beyond this list, but I think this list is a really terrific summary of what we're looking at. And I think just to organize our thinking about it, we're not going to go through every item tonight because it's too much, but there's maybe what you can think of as three kind of categories. One is city operations focused, so looking at the city's practices and footprint, things like updating the green building ordinance, looking at building energy benchmarking for city-owned buildings, solar readiness requirements for the city, for new city buildings, some lawn equipment replacement things, local food purchasing. Again, either specifically city processes or sometimes a group buy kind of idea with maybe trying to bring in IU or MCCSC or others who are natural partners. The community side things are usually more like our legislative tools, ordinances that require a certain development standard or shift incentives in some way. So the idea of either residential or commercial building energy benchmarking. Indianapolis passed a policy about a year ago that phases in commercial building energy benchmarking with requirements on reporting and that sort of thing. It's a pretty intensive program and kind of a big lift maybe to get off the ground, but that's an example. These tend to be a little maybe harder to implement because you're not necessarily going to have ready-made buy-in. Solar ready ordinances, solar access ordinances, clarifying who has priority rights to sunlight for solar. Unbundling parking for multifamily dwellings or others in the UDO, so saying that you can't loop it into the cost of rent. We've already been in the practice of doing that with a lot of planned unit developments over the years, but actually trying to codify that, I'm not sure how that might apply to existing, obviously not existing leases, but going forward, I'm not sure if that, like how that would affect existing properties. The idea of phasing out gas lawn equipment definitely would be great, but a pretty tricky one to do, and is probably much more of like a phase 3 type of project. Probably needs to phase it over years, really tackle things with incentives first. And then that third category, so we've got kind of city operations, community scale, policy tools. The third category is really finance and funding options. So a few things around the idea of a carbon tax, a solar-specific TIF district and policy, identifying dedicated funding for a 5-year transportation funding plan in conjunction with MPO dollars. One could say that the 2 bond proposals from the mayor are more or less in line with that, at least in significant part. The idea of a resilience penny property tax increase, I think it's 100th of 1%, as just a very small tax increase that would go to a dedicated fund, I imagine. And then finally, carbon impact fees with development. I'm not. Oh, there was another one: gas and gas franchise fees, and some others too. Gas and electric franchise fees. So I don't know if those are kind of our categories we're thinking about. I think I guess I'll share my initial take and then welcome feedback and thoughts. And it seems to me like a few of the city operations steps are good first steps to kind of work on our process in terms of developing legislation for the cap, working with the administration to figure out how to prioritize those and work through them. Maybe we want to start to take some initial steps for lower hanging fruit on the community scale actions too, like parking unbundling, starting to research that. And then the finance side, really, we're kind of tackling a lot of that right now, actually, or imminently with the mayor's revenue and bonding proposals. So it's pretty related. In my point of aggregating this and wanting to talk about this is making sure that we don't drop the ball from the council side in terms of, the legislative components of the climate action plan, which, while certainly produced collaboratively, are our responsibility to some extent. And second, trying to phase work in a way that is fairly steady and and logical in its sequencing, and not leaving too many actions to the last minute, so to speak. So that's kind of my motivation in wanting this committee to think about those suites of actions and maybe tackling a few of those this year. Doesn't mean we can't do other things like looking at recycling requirements, obviously for multifamily, and almost all of the other things we've talked about and would consider would feed into and support goals in the caps, even if they're not a specific action. So yeah, that's kind of my overview of the landscape, and invite feedback and thoughts.
Yeah, I think the green building ordinance revisions are very important to update that, 13-year-old ordinance that I was a co-author of way back in the day. But there are several ways we could improve that. So that seems like low-hanging fruit for this year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about in the financing, you're right, I think that we need to, definitely consider the mayor's current new revenue proposals in the context of our CAP and SAP. I'm not sure about community, which one of those might be the first we should tackle. Those are.
So this is why I mentioned UDO updates. Is I touched base with Scott Robinson because they're bringing some updates that I think are already in the queue with Plan Commission. Some pretty minimal things. And I was trying to see if we could loop a few things in, but it was kind of too far along in the process. But both solar ready ordinance, I'm sure it would take some best practices research to figure out exactly what that means and what we could do with it in Indiana. I assume that's some level of like running conduit and having. Do you know more, Lauren, about like what would encompass a solar-ready ordinance?
So it would just ensure that the standards of construction for the building code were sufficient, that if solar was added later, like things like roof orientation on construction are suitable for solar being added later. I don't know about mandating that necessarily.
Yeah.
One of the areas in terms of like solar ready and solar access that I think could be an area that I want to work on with Gloria is looking at the historic preservation guidelines for solar and their consistency across different districts, because I think it is difficult for residents to navigate that when it is significantly different depending on what area of the community that you're living in, because that creates a additional step to go through if you're trying to get solar. So that's a guideline. It's a little bit easier to change than like building code, for instance. So that's another area that started conversations with her about that and aggregated those, and that might be further engagement with some different neighborhood associations as well.
Sounds good. And yeah, parking unbundling was the other one that is a code change that seems not.
On the subject of the green building ordinance, I think that would be really great, specifically also because more clearly defining what's a city project. Like, is it it says a renovation, but like codifying that more closely of like what qualifies needing to be LEED Silver, or should it still be LEED Silver as a standard? What financing do we have available to cover the cost of the difference when it's going to save money over the course of the project? Do like projects that go through that are initially city funded qualify if they're going to have different ownership later? What is the appropriate sustainability standards and exceedance of the UDO? So.
And there's LEED. At the time, LEED was really the only rating system.
Yeah.
Now there are other systems that are just as valid. So that's another consideration.
So that's one I think would be helpful. I mean, working with the Hopewell internal group about talking about sustainability requirements in coordination with a contract with Guidon, which is a architecture and engineering firm out of Indianapolis that works with different sustainable construction projects, and they did the new hospital LEED certification process. So I think that will be helpful, as well as kind of looking at what's our current standards and how can we maybe like codify or create options to have better building performance and sustainability outcomes for new construction, whether it's a city site or city leased or city renovated or city owned.
So they could maybe advise on some of these guidelines.
Yeah, so.
I think clarifying those triggering, the trigger for the ordinance is really important, because there are a lot of creative financing mechanisms where the city gets involved in some way or another, right? And like, when is it actually in effect or not? And not your obvious case of a city-owned and built facility to house our employees, but
Yeah, we've done a
something
few
different,
where we've
like the mill, or
in the pass-through kind
even
of.
the new technology park center. I forget what it's called. Like what? I don't know. I know there's already C funds leveraged for that. What's that? Oh yeah, I know.
Commission session tomorrow.
Yep. Also council meeting. Okay. So we're at about the max we said we wanted to go here. Any final questions or thoughts? I can loop. Okay,
Well,
go ahead,
I
Ron.
have one thing that always keeps coming up in my head, since I'm kind of like new to this group and all this. I keep on wanting to identify what are the things we're doing really bad in Bloomington as far as like carbon and methane and all. And you mentioned, perhaps Matt mentioned about there's a 3-page analysis or something that you sent us.
Can resend it. It's just a list of potential council legislative priorities that align with the.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so back to my brain is that what are those things that low-hanging fruit I like? So what are those things that are out there that we could get the best bang for a buck with? Like is there some big areas that we are doing terrible at in Bloomington as far as that goes? And if there is, you know, rolling it into some kind of legislation, changing UDO, all that, I would, of course, favor that. So it doesn't have to be answered. I'm not like trying to get you guys to answer it exactly. I'm just like, that's one of the things that I would like to be able to understand that, so that then you can focus your priorities, or our priorities, or the council's priorities, right? So, I don't know.
Well, isn't that what the Climate Action Plan and the Sustainability Action Plan are? I mean, those were
You
done
mean
here locally and considered.
You mean the spreadsheet?
The plans, they
Well-
should focus our energies on, I mean, they have their goals spelled out through a intensive process.
To answer your question, at the end of each chapter, there's a graph, and it shows of each strategy what's going to have the biggest carbon benefit. And so that differs based on what sector you're talking about. But, like, for instance, with waste.
That's in the climate action plan.
Yeah.
Gotcha, because I read all the spreadsheet and
It
it
is.
just blew me away.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
did. But
No,
so
it's fair.
in that
Yeah.
is where I can look at.
Yeah,
that.
so
Okay.
it's broken down. If you just want to check it out by chapter, that can be a little bit more digestible. So if you skip to the end of the chapter, it will show you. So, like, if this percentage of carbon would be reduced if we went solar versus implementing another type of action, because not everything has the same impact, and that's what I think is important to think about when we're trying to prioritize what should we start with, what should we spend the most time working on.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, the plan was incredibly comprehensive, but it was overwhelming to me to kind of digest it.
That's fair.
So thank you for,
Yeah.
I will do that and take a look at it. I did read every line of the
Okay.
spreadsheet.
I think there's an executive
You did?
summary.
I did.
Gold star for you.
I read every line going, wow.
I preferred it in the context of the cap, where there were charts and graphs and pictures.
Each chapter, Ron,
Less
has a
density.
page like this where it estimates annual reductions in emissions for the particular strategy by 2030. Yeah.
Well, I will go back and revisit that, so thanks.
There's also a executive summary linked too, if you just need like a 5-page cheat sheet of like what the big ideas are.
Well, the big ideas I'm good with.
Okay.
But it's the
Yeah.
biggest bang for your buck, low hanging fruit,
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
number of different items on a spreadsheet just, it did overwhelm me.
Like the short answer to that is most of our emissions come from electricity and natural gas use, so buildings, energy, next transportation, reducing the amount of emissions from cars, next waste. So in terms of like what's gotten worse during the pandemic, we're generating more waste than ever.
Oh,
So that is also just to get back to that baseline of where we were before the pandemic, that sort of is related to COVID and people spending more time at home, throwing out more, and driving in their own vehicles more than taking the bus. And
Right.
so there's been some backsliding from the pandemic for sure.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I think we can probably loop back on scheduling given the time via email and figure out a meeting sometime in the 2 to 3 month range from now, unless you
Yeah.
were really wanting to meet with us before the council report.
I don't have final confirmation of scheduling, so
Mhm.
I'll just need to let you know.
Okay.
And maybe it's somewhere in between April 9th and May 18th or whenever it
Yeah.
might be, so I think there's some shuffling.
Council report. So we'll
Yep.
just stay in touch and plan on sticking to our roughly quarterly schedule, and can be in touch via email about taking next steps potentially on any of these legislative items and that sort of thing. And I'll continue to update you all from the climate action team. And yeah, we'll go from there. Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And with that,
Thank
we
you,
are
Lauren.
adjourned.
Yeah, of course.